In terms of overall fit for the Sacramento Kings and what they're looking for at that 4 spot, shooting, defense, overall high basketball IQ, Keegan Murray seems to check all the boxes and then some. Is he the perfect fit prospect in this draft class that the Kings would consider taking as high as 4? To give us more of a background on Keegan Murray, how he got to this point, the exact type of player he is, and how he can fit with Sabonis, De'Aaron Fox, and the Sacramento Kings, I'm going to be joined by Kennington Lloyd Smith III. He is a beat writer covering Iowa hoops right here on the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off-season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. This will be my 9th season covering Sacramento Kings basketball, and I am looking forward very much to my soon-to-be 6th year hosting the Locked On Kings podcast in year 5 right now. Currently work for ABC 10 News in Sacramento. If you missed yesterday's Locked On Kings podcast, I spoke with a Purdue basketball beat writer a lot about Jaden Ivey, who many believe is the lock or is the most likely pick for the Sacramento Kings at 4. They consider him to be the high upside, exciting, athletic pick that is a tier above the man who we're going to talk today, Keegan Murray, who I personally am leaning towards drafting Keegan Murray as of right now. I expect things to change a million times before the draft next month, but I like a lot of what Keegan Murray does. However, I'm not going to lie to you, I haven't watched a lot of Keegan Murray's actual games. I've gone back, watched a bunch of game film, talked to a bunch of people both on the record and off the record about Keegan Murray, including my guest on today's podcast, Kennington Lloyd Smith III. He is the first time I've ever spoken with him, reached out, chatted with him a little bit off the air about Keegan, and then asked if he would be willing to come on Locked On Kings and talk about it more. He graciously said yes, and it's really a pleasure to be able to have him on. You're going to get some really good insight on who Keegan Murray is, why he was so successful last season in Iowa, the massive jump really across the board that he made for Iowa, why Kennington thinks that not only is he a ideal fit in Sacramento, but why he should be considered up there with Sharp, with Ivy, and those, I guess, next tier level of players who many consider to be above him. I hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you're leaning on Jaden Ivey's side, if you're leaning towards the Kings taking Jaden Ivey, I'm not saying that this conversation is going to change your mind necessarily, but just let me know after this conversation is done if it's budged a little bit. I'll talk to you on the other side. As soon as we found out the Sacramento Kings were picking 4th in the draft after the draft lottery, the name Jaden Ivey was all over the lips and all over social media here in Sacramento. But after about 12 hours of show, all of a sudden, Keegan Murray started picking up a lot of steam. And I've said it before here on Locked On Kings, in terms of a guy that fits really well with what the Sacramento Kings are looking for, especially next to Domantas Sabonis, Keegan Murray checks a lot of boxes. I'm very excited to invite Kennington Lloyd Smith III here on to Locked On Kings. Kenny, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you, my friend. Really appreciate you taking the time to join me here. You can give us the perspective as a beat writer covering Iowa basketball. You can really tell us what it was like the day-to-day watching Keegan Murray play basketball. What's the first thing that you could tell us about what not just Kings fans, but any NBA fan can expect out of this young man?
Yeah, one thing that I'll say about Keegan Murray is that he is such a confident player, but it doesn't come out in the way that you would expect confidence to come out of a player who's projected into the top 5. I think that a lot of times his even temperament gets misunderstood as him not caring enough about basketball, or him not having that fiery emotion that it takes to lead a team and to be that type of elite player. But he really is just somebody who doesn't get too high or too low. But when he steps onto the court, there is no doubt in his mind or in his teammates' minds that he's the best player on the court. And, we saw that all throughout this past year at Iowa, especially for him to step into the situation that he did. I mean, look at where he was at this time last year on a team with Luka Garza was a National Player of the Year. Joe Wieskamp who was another prominent player who ended up being a second-round pick in the NBA draft. And he kind of took a backseat to those guys as veterans and just filled a role that was needed as kind of a bench player, somebody who was kind of doing the dirty work. And then coming into this year, knowing that he was going to be the number one player, that confidence of knowing that he could not only step into Luka Garza's shoes, but even surpass him in terms of breaking the single season scoring record and being an All-American like Luka Garza and being a finalist for the National Player of the Year as well, just shows, the type of the player that he is and the type of confidence that he exudes. So it doesn't come out in kind of like that brashy type of way, but internally that confidence has always been there. And I think that that's something that any NBA team, if they are, fortunate enough to get him, is going to see on a day-to-day basis.
There's a wide variety of takes and opinions from scouts and draft experts, draft gurus out there about Keegan Murray and where he belongs in terms of the draft. And the one thing I will say is I haven't really seen anybody say anything negative about him. The most negative thing that I've seen honestly said about Keegan Murray is the fact that he is, in some opinions, the safe pick, which sometimes safe has a negative connotation. In the case of the Kings, who have a horrendous draft history, safe might not be the worst thing on the planet. But many consider him like a tier under a guy like Jaden Ivey or a guy like even Shaedon Sharpe in that top three. But then I've seen the other side. I've heard draft analysts on ESPN say, one, he's a perfect fit for the Sacramento Kings for what they need. And two, he belongs in the conversation amongst those top four, maybe even top three players. Do you think Keegan belongs all the way at the top with his name amongst those guys?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you look at maybe the knocks on him, when you're talking about being a safe pick or not being in that same conversations like the Ivies and the Sharps and the others, I think that a few things you have to consider is one, that he's an older prospect. And I know that times deters NBA teams. He's a 21-year-old sophomore. He went the high school route and then did a prep year at DME Academy of Florida, then went to Iowa afterwards. So he's an older prospect for somebody who's, a sophomore academically. And I know that is something that, factors in the NBA teams. And another thing is that he is not, even though he's a wing player, he doesn't necessarily blow you away with his athleticism the way that maybe some other wing players will in the draft. And I think that's another reason why, maybe eye test wise or others, flashier players or high flying players like Ivy or others might, grab a scout's attention as somebody who might be a little bit more of an explosive player, somebody who might be perceived as having a higher ceiling than Keegan Murray. But if you watch him play and you look at the numbers, raw numbers, and then even the advanced metrics, I mean, he was one of the best in the country. He led the nation in points. He was fourth in points per game, top rebounder of the team, close to 60% field goal percentage, 40% three-point shooter. Then we look at the advanced metrics. He led the nation in win shares, led the nation in box score plus minus per game. So all of those things, together lets you know that he is, not only one of the top players in this draft class, but you can make a legit argument that he is the top player in this class. I believe Mike Schmidt from ESPN said that he is the most complete player in this draft, and somebody who, he said it, probably has the lowest bust potential would be him. So, I understand the negative connotations on that one end, but then also when you kind of look at, the way that he plays and the things that he was able to do at Iowa, I don't think it's a stretch to say that this was kind of a generational type of year when you look at the statistics of what he did and then the jump that he made from being kind of a reserve player as a freshman to being, one of the top players in the country. He wasn't somebody, I really can't even think of an example as somebody who was like let's say a blue chip high school All-American type player, and then was a really good freshman and then decided to come back for a sophomore year and improve his draft stock. He was kind of, that lowly recruited high school player under the radar, and then really broke out onto the scene at Iowa. So I think if you look at it from that lens, I think the case to be made that the best is yet to come for him because he's really starting to realize his potential. We saw a glimpse of that in his sophomore year at Iowa.
Yeah, I understand, I suppose, the negatives around him being an older prospect, although that never bothered me personally. And clearly that hasn't bothered Kings general manager Monty McNair, who took Davion Mitchell, who was on the older side last season. So to kind of lay the groundwork for you a little bit, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Kings situation, but they traded for Domantas Sabonis at the trade deadline last year. Sabonis has 2 more years on his contract. The Kings basically have 2 years to convince Sabonis to stick around. The best way they're going to do that is by winning basketball games. So they're looking for players, whether through the draft or through trades, through free agency, doesn't matter. They're looking for plug and play players who can come in here and be immediate impacts that can help winning. Now, I think it's easier to find that from proven NBA talent in a trade or free agency than it is from the draft. But in terms of a rookie who can come in, maybe he doesn't start right away, but he is contributing to winning basketball right away. Does Keegan Murray make sense for you there?
Yeah, and I think that what you said about somebody coming in and filling a role next to an all-star like Sabonis, and then they obviously have, staples of their franchise like De'Aaron Fox, and they drafted Davion Mitchell in the lottery last year. I think that Keegan's experience of not always being the most heralded prospect and not always being used to being the star of the team, and again, being in a situation where, let's say you're a 5-star prospect, you've always been the best player, you've always been the most hyped player, you go to a D1 school, you're the best player there, and then you're going to an NBA team and you're not all of a sudden not the best player because you do have an all-star there, you have other franchise pieces there. It might be difficult for that player to adjust and kind of conform to a lesser role. But I think that Keegan having that experience of playing kind of under a Luka Garza and a Joe Wieskamp and the CJ Fredericks and the Jordan Bohannons of Iowa, and understanding that he had a role to fill on that team, and that's what they had to do to be successful. And then when he was called upon to be the best player, like he was this year, he kind of seamlessly transitioned into that role. So when I look at the Kings situation, and, obviously they have a lot of question marks and a lot of free agents at that forward position. So if Keegan Murray was able, was needed to come in there and start, I think he can do that. If they needed him to come off the bench and be a spark plug and to go in there and guard the best, bench offensive player on the other team and be a scoring player off the bench, he obviously can do that because that's what he did his freshman year at Iowa. And we want to talk about somebody who is extremely low maintenance. Iowa coach Fran McCaffery said, he is like no maintenance, one of the lowest maintenance players that he's ever had to coach. So he's going to come in extremely humble. He's not going to come in, demanding this, that, and the third just because he was a top 5 pick. I think that kind of his background, his upbringing, and kind of his story to this point has, kind of tailor-made him into the position that he can be in, where he can be a plug and play in any type of role that Mike Brown's going to need up there in Sacramento next year.
You're selling me more and more with every word out of your mouth, and I'm going to keep going with this, my man. So I heard ESPN analysts and draft analysts talking a lot about one of the things that impressed them about Keegan Murray is he had this major jump in scoring up to 23.5 points per game. But they said specifically that Iowa didn't force him to score. They didn't drop a lot of plays for him. He scored a lot in the flow of the offense. That sounds ideal when you're being paired in an offense next to De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis that are going to have the ball in their hands the majority of the time and the attention on them the majority of the time. Is that accurate though? Did he score 23.5 points per game? As obviously he was a focal point of the offense, but they weren't running plays for him every time and needing him to execute and do everything himself.
Yeah, there was, Fran McCaffery sounded almost like a broken record throughout the year when he said so many times throughout the year, Keegan Murray does not hunt shots. Like he's not going to disrupt the flow of the offense in order for him to go out there and get his. I mean, there have been games where, us as reporters and fans on Twitter who are following the game are wondering why isn't he getting 30 shots a game? Or why are they just force feeding him the ball? Or why isn't he just like, give me the ball, everybody get out of the way, I'm just going to ISO and take over the game? But that's not really the type of player that he is. Like, he really just trusts the system that's in place wherever, he's playing with under Fred McCaffery. Iowa likes to get out. They like to run in transition. Whoever gets the rebound is the one who's going to initiate the offense, kind of going out, and they're going to play within the flow that way. So he's not going to do anything demonstrative, just, to have his hands on the ball. So his unselfishness is really one of the things that made him such a great player in Fran McCaffery's eyes, and what made it possible for Iowa to capture a Big Ten championship for the first time since 2006. So just talk about, again, goes back to the low maintenance thing, just talks about, the low ego, doing whatever it takes for the team to win. Now, there were moments where he did take over the game, and he did, have to go on, scoring runs in order for Iowa to be successful. So I'm not saying that in a way that's like, oh, he's afraid of, the moment, or he's afraid to get the ball in his hands and take over a game, but he's just not going to do it just to do it, if that makes sense.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Bet Online. They continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports information. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including the basketball playoffs going on right now, MLB baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures, all available right now to bet on Bet Online. Plus, you can have some fun surrounding the NBA draft, coaching searches for other teams, future bets for the NBA that'll be coming soon. There's so much fun to be had at Bet Online, ways that you can make money using your Kings and overall sports knowledge. Bet Online is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at Bet Online, where the game starts. What can you tell me about his defense? Because offensively, you see where he can fit, spaces the floor, makes a lot of sense there. 40% three-point shooter this season in college. But defensively, I've heard good things about him, but the Kings defensively have been dreadful for 16 years. And one of the things they need, which Davion Mitchell is starting to help with, is they need to change their culture defensively. They now have Mike Brown coming in, known as a defensive-minded head coach. But Keegan Murray, defense at the NBA level, his potential as an NBA defender, his potential as a rim protector, which the Kings don't really have, even though he's 6'8". What do you think about him defensively?
Yeah, he's an elite defensive prospect. And I haven't been covering Iowa very long. I got this job around this time last year. One of the first things that I did was kind of a draft preview for this upcoming draft on Keegan Murray. And I was able to talk to several draft analysts. And what they said was his defense was the reason why he was a projected first round pick last summer. And he was known as somebody who could switch and play multiple positions on defense and guard multiple positions. And that's really what he was as a bench player at Iowa his freshman year, somebody who come in there, get steals, get rebounds, blocks, and kind of take away opposing offensive players whenever he was on the court. The question was he going to be able to knock down perimeter shots? Was he going to be able to be a 3-level scorer? What was his 3-point and free throw percentage look like? So the questions about his game were really offensive. Defensively, there weren't really questions about what he was going to be able to do from the powers that be that scout these players out a few years in advance. He was, I believe it's Lefty Dreisel. I believe that's the All-American defensive team that picks the best players. He was a member of the first team All Defense nationally. I don't have the defensive metrics up in front of me right now, but he was one of the best defensive players in the conference. So that's not really going to be a concern. I think that when you look at him, 6'8", 220, can guard the 3, the 4, and the 5, which he had to do a lot at Iowa because they were an undersized team last year. So he had to play a lot in the post defensively, and then also had to go out on the perimeter and guard players as well. So he fits what the NBA is looking for. When you think about versatile defenders and players who can knock down perimeter shots, he's kind of, exactly what the NBA is looking for right now. So, defensively, and kind of, you want to talk about a defensive identity, you go out and get Davion Mitchell, the best defensive player in college a year ago, and then you follow that up with somebody who can guard the 3, the 4, and the 5 at an elite level as well, and Keegan Murray. I think that is going to be that'll be quite the pairing, those two, and really building up the foundation of the Kings defense.
When people talk about Jaden Ivey, they talk about this athleticism, his ability to, he's super fast, the fast break, the flash, comparisons to John Morant, things of that nature. And they say, Keegan Murray, he just doesn't have as high of a ceiling as a guy like Jaden Ivey has, even if he is kind of safer. What is Keegan Murray's floor, and what is Keegan Murray's ceiling realistically as an NBA player in your mind? Yeah,
I think that when you look at current NBA players, somebody who I think that he could have a similar early impact to is like a Mikal Bridges on the Phoenix Suns, somebody who elite defender in college. It was a good scorer in college, but now with the Suns, he's still that elite defender. He was in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year, and we're just starting to see him continue to progress offensively. I think another player that you could compare him to is Malcolm Brogdon, even though they're not the same position and not the same size. You want to talk about elite defender, you're wondering if the offense is going to come along. I think that he is farther along offensively than both of the names that I mentioned at this point. So I think that floor-wise, he's going to be a consistent starter in the NBA, and somebody, if not a starter, somebody who can be kind of like that 6-man role and be a contributor. Ceiling-wise, I think that we're looking at somebody maybe like a Chris Middleton, Kawhi Leonard type, really elite two-way player. Get a stop, get a bucket, at an elite level type player. So that's kind of the comparisons that I'm looking at. I mean, I think that the term five-tool players used in baseball, I think that that's like comparable to Keegan Murray as somebody, 3-level scorer, outside perimeter shooting, defense, can guard multiple positions, can initiate the offense. He has a little bit of playmaking ability. He didn't do that a lot at Iowa just because of, the guard play that they had, but he does have that type of ability. So, he's kind of one of those like high floor, high ceiling type players. I think that if he never got any better than he is right now, he could start in the NBA and make an immediate impact. But if he continues to improve at this level, then you're talking about somebody who could be an all-star caliber player.
In terms of power forwards, fours, Keegan's rated third behind Jabari Smith and Paulo Banchero, who are both expected to be in the top three of this draft. What makes those two, in your mind, if at all, better than Keegan, or are they on an equal playing field in your mind? Is the gap not as big as maybe some people expect?
Yeah, I think that those are probably more natural fours than Keegan is. I think that, in a I don't know about a perfect world, but in a situation like the Kings, for example, let's say they don't bring Harrison Barnes back. I think that would be a natural fit at the three for Keegan. I think that he's somebody who could play who's like more of like a natural three small forward, but has that ability to play that stretch four and could be that stretch four. I think that's probably the difference between him and like a Banchero or a Jabari Smith, who are kind of like more naturally of like that 4-5 type mold. I think that he's more the kind of a three, but he is going to play four. He did that at Iowa. They have a three, and Patrick McCaffrey was a top 100 level recruit. So in order to kind of put them both on the floor at the same time, that's what they did. But that's kind of where I fall on that argument. I kind of look at him more as like a true three, but obviously has that ability to play and start at the four if a team needed him to be.
He doesn't have any red flags, but in terms of maybe concerns you would have or areas of his game that he definitely needs to work on and develop more at the NBA level, what do you think is towards the top of the list of this is where he can get better? Yeah,
I think that for him, I think that it's a matter of just being a little bit more selfish at times. We talked about him not hunting shots and him not kind of taking over a game. I think that the Richmond game that they lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament was probably the most clear and recent example that I have of where it was apparent that Iowa's offense wasn't executing at a high level, and they really needed somebody to take that game over and put them over the hump. And he went a long stretch in that game without attempting a shot. Obviously, some credit goes to Richmond for how they were defending him and kind of took him out of that game. But I think that if I could, pinpoint an area that he does need to improve on, I would probably say that's where he would need to improve, is just continuing to work on that aggressiveness and when the moment calls for him to take over a game, for him to just kind of do it instinctively. But like I say, he's really confident kid, and we're starting to see that continue to progress. And now that he is in a position to where teams are kind of expecting him to now be that number one. This was his first year as the guy, so to say, on a really big team. So as he continues to progress and he continues to have those expectations on him, I expect that to be a kind of a natural maturation for him.
It sounds like what you're saying is he'll fit in a lot of places, but looking at the top range of the lottery outside of Sacramento, do you see other teams that you think, man, that would be a perfect situation for him? Or in your mind, are the Kings that perfect situation for him?
I think that's a really good situation for him, especially like I said about the question marks that they have at the forward position right now with the free agents that they have and kind of how they're thinking about reconstructing the roster with the new head coach. But if the Kings were to pass on him, I don't think he's making it past Detroit at 5. There's obvious familial connections there. His dad was a Mr. Michigan basketball as a high school player. Luka Garza is there, so he get a chance to reunite with him. I think that him and Cade Cunningham together would be an incredible fit with Jeremy Grant and Sadiq Bey, and kind of what they're building there in Detroit. I would love, I think that him with the Houston Rockets would be a really good fit. They've already kind of devoted a lot of their draft capital to guard play with Jalen Green and Josh Christopher, and they have Christian Wood at the 5. You insert somebody like Keegan Murray at the 3, playing alongside like a Jay Sean Tate. I think that would be a really good fit as well. I don't think that he's going to rise to the level where we're talking about him as a top 2 pick. So I'm looking at, 3, 4, 5, and 6. If he were to make it past Detroit, the Indiana Pacers already talked about him and Malcolm Brogdon being kind of similar. You think about him, Brogdon, Halliburton together in a starting lineup as they start to rebuild that thing in Indiana, I think would be a great fit as well. And he's like the 3 that Damian Lillard has been waiting for his entire career. Somebody who, a lead defender on the perimeter, somebody who can score as well. So anywhere between 3 and 7, I think that he will be a great fit for in this upcoming draft.
This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by one of our newer sponsors, that's Sakara. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. Sakara gives you the tools that you need to transform your life with their organic, ready-to-eat meal delivery program and functional wellness essentials. Their nutritionally designed, chef-created breakfasts, lunches, and dinners are made with powerful plant-rich ingredients, helping boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, and get your skin glowing. Plus, it's all delivered right to your door, ready to eat. You don't have to go through the hassle of grocery shopping, finding recipes, and putting it all together. They do it all for you. Sakara's functional plant-rich wellness essentials help you create a body that you love living in, from their best-selling Metabolism Super Powder to the Foundation, which is their daily supplement packs. Sakara's products are designed to support your wellness goals anytime, anywhere, any meal of the day. Right now, Sakara is offering Locked On Kings listeners 20% off their first order, which is an amazing deal when you go to sakara.com/lockedon20, or just enter promo code LOCKEDON20 at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/lockedon20 to get 20% off your first order. Sakara.com/lockedon20. Really appreciate Kennington joining me on the Locked On Kings podcast. So now I got to know, are you feeling Keegan Murray a little bit more? Are you still very much on the team Jaden Ivey train? Are you interested in somebody else? I know Shaedon Sharpe is picking up a lot of steam here in Sacramento, even though I have some reservations and concerns about him. Let me know right now where you're at. Maybe this conversation won you over a little bit. It certainly made me pro Keegan Murray after I had the conversation. You can reach me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Again, really appreciate Kennington joining me here on Locked On Kings. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to be doing on a future episode, once new Kings head coach Mike Brown's entire staff is put together, we'll be going over that staff, some of the names, their backgrounds a little bit. But I did want to mention, as we found out yesterday, Doug Christie, he will be remaining on the Sacramento Kings coaching staff. No idea if that was a fully Mike Brown decision or a Vivek decision or a Monty McNair decision. Regardless, Doug Christie is remaining on the Kings bench as an assistant coach. I think that's a phenomenal call. Doug is amazing. He's fantastic. He's a great coach, just a great guy altogether. Spent a couple of years working with him, and some of my best working memories in Sacramento sports radio were alongside Doug. He's an incredible human being, and I'm very, very happy to see him sticking around selfishly and for the sake of the Sacramento Kings. I think it's a fantastic decision. So congratulations, DC, on sticking around. Looking forward to seeing him still in his great spot there on the sidelines, sitting on the Kings bench at the Golden One Center and on the road. Congratulations to him. Now we turn our attention maybe towards other prospects. I still have so many great guests coming here on Locked On Kings in the near future. My actual next episode, we're going back to theoretical trade conversations. And the next one, I'm going to be joined by Rylan Stiles. He's the host of the Locked On Thunder podcast. We're going to talk about the possibility of the Kings using the number 4 overall pick to try and make a play for, say, Gilgeous-Alexander. Would the Thunder even consider it? Do the Kings have a shot? What would they have to attach to the 4th pick to get the Thunder to even consider that deal? Rylan and I will discuss it on the next episode of Locked On Kings. I hope you will join me for that. And thank you to everybody who has left reviews recently on Apple Podcasts. That number approaching like 310 or 315 right now. If we get above 350, I will be buying a pair of opening night tickets to the Kings home opener, and I will be giving them away to a Locked On Kings listener. So if you haven't left a review, please do that on Apple Podcasts. Create an account really quick, hit 5 stars, leave a little blurb about what you like or why you encourage others to listen to the Locked On Kings podcast. Thank you to everybody who's done that already. Really appreciate you. And there's so many great ratings on Spotify as well. So I appreciate all my Spotify listeners who have left reviews there. Really appreciate appreciate that too. So thanks for joining me. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode. Again, let me know, Jaden Ivey, Shaden Sharp, Keegan Murray, where are you at right now with who you take with the 4th overall pick? I can't wait to see those responses, and I will chat with you next time. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.